I'm Tanja K. Johnson, and this is Voices of Color, a writing podcast. Episode 6, Writing Dialogue That Doesn't Suck. In today's episode, we will be discussing dialogue. This is one of the most pivotal cornerstones in any novel. If your dialogue doesn't flow, it's not going to sit well with your readers. I'm Tanja K. Johnson.
Victoria Wilder, author of the upcoming novel Lullaby of the Lilitube.
Sylvester Barzy, author of the post-apocalyptic series Planet Dead.
I'm Alexander Christian, author of Allengard. It's somewhere between grimdark and dark fantasy.
First question I want to throw out to you guys. What makes dialogue flow well?
It is definitely the relationship between the people. For me, anyway, I think when a child and a parent speaks, there are certain notes you've got to hit. A relationship dynamic. And it has to be different for friends and it has to be different for enemies. I think the relationship of the people has to come through clearly in the dialogue, in the words that they choose.
Yeah, I think it helps to do that and have some character development as they're talking. Dialogue that lets you get to know the people as they're talking, lets you get to know like their personality and what they believe.
Yeah, like when I first began writing, I was very focused on dialogue because I felt like I told most of the story through dialogue, which probably isn't the best thing to do, but that's how I built my surrounding characters, or just built tension and emotion for my main character, is through her dialogue. Like even feelings for some things, like in my YA fantasy, I have two best friends who just call each other by a nickname, and then when it gets close to the end and one of them's close to dying, that's like the first time you hear her call her by her real name. And I just believe things like that build tension and just really drive home your point. And yeah, I just think dialogue's like a major part for a story.
I definitely think that keeping the dialogue brief and as natural sounding as possible is really important. And the way that I make sure that my dialogue sounds natural and not wooden is that I'll just go over and I'll read it out loud to myself. And if it doesn't sound like something I would say, then I know I need to change it.
That's a really great tip. That's a great tip for anything that when you're writing, to read it out loud to yourself and make sure it sounds good to your own ear. What you said with shorter dialogue, having it just be very brief, very quick, and wrapping it up in action also kind of allows your reader's brain to keep moving along with what's happening instead of getting stuck with one person giving like a monologue.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely a style that is long gone. And it's not something that we naturally do as speakers in a conversation. To have like these huge blocks of text of just one person talking constantly.
I actually would like to push back against that.
Okay, definitely do it.
Ooh.
Make me a believer.
Stand up for the monologue. Go get it.
Because I'm writing fantasy, there is definitive power dynamics. So if the king wants to pontificate, he will stand there and talk for as long as he sees fit, and you will nod and smile and be happy for the opportunity. It wouldn't be that way with, let's say with peers or with friends or even with family members, but they're definitely in a power dynamic.
I mean, I guess that's true, but I'm like, I have royalty in one of my stories, and to avoid me having like a long monologue, I'd have someone interrupt her, and then that person gets hit in the back of the head with a shotgun, and then it's just like,
yes, with a shotgun.
Well, with the butt of the shotgun, you just gotta like, bam.
Gotta be
talking.
Well, it is true that they'll probably go on and on, especially someone who likes to have their voice heard, which is royalty a lot of the time. I think cutting it up with action can help break it up for your reader, because it does get just kind of exhausting just reading one person talking for a long time, unless there are exceptions to every rule. And I think if a character's telling a story, then they're going to be
that's true.
It's going to be dialogue, but it's not going to feel like a monologue. They're going to be telling a story, so there's action within what they're saying.
It's one of my favorite, to read just like a block of one person speaking is that pre-war speech that generals give. I love that. Right before the soldiers go off to war, and the general's like, swords will shatter and armor will splinter, but we will not fall, men of the West. Yeah, I love that.
The riling speech, we're going to go and we may die, but we got this.
Yeah.
Wow.
I got to tell myself every morning.
We might not come back. Like, those things are good.
Let's segue into a more technical portion of the conversation. How do you format your dialogue to make it the most effective and the easiest for your readers to understand and digest?
This is a fun one. I love using action tags more than dialogue tags, or just using action instead of, because dialogue tags for me just kind of slow things down. A lot of people, I think, confuse how to write a dialogue tag like she said, and how to use an action tag like she went to the other side of the room. They're not going to be an action tag's not going to be the same sentence as your dialogue. They're going to be two separate sentences. And a lot of people I see will put those together. Like they'll have the dialogue, a comma, and then have their action, but it's a completely different sentence. And I think that's a big thing that I see a lot when I'm editing.
I have a question, since I have access to someone who may know. I would do things like, "Don't be here when I return," she said over her shoulder as she left the room. Is that an action tag? Is that a dialogue tag? Is that even correct?
It's correct. It's a dialogue tag because you're starting with "she said." At that point, it becomes blah, 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 she said. And then the rest just adds on to the way she's saying it, and it shows you how she's saying it. But it'd be different if you said, "Don't be here when I get back." She looked over her shoulder and scowled. Then that's an action tag. So I think it's about the verb that you use that determines whether it's action or whether it's a dialogue tag. If you use a dialogue verb like said, whispered, called, then it's going to be a dialogue tag more than likely than the other one.
About those verbs that you use at the end, those tag verbs, what are the ones that you guys usually use? What are your go-to verbs? And what are the ones you should be using?
People overthink it sometimes. I just stay to the basic, like he said or she said. Like,
this is actually like a hotly contested thing in writing groups. Like, she said, as like, because it's invisible, nobody's going to really pay attention when they see she said. Or do you try to use something like she bellowed and he screamed and they yelled? I personally just think moderation is the key, and I will use just whatever seems to work. But if I do have the urge to use something like she screamed, then I'll usually take that away and use an action tag, and like she screamed at the top of her lungs, or like, I don't know, I'll find some way to make it less of a dialogue tag if I'm using something other than said. That's not 100%. I do like balance. I do like to try whatever just fits for the story.
Yeah, I've been trying to mix it up a lot because I got called out on my first book by a reviewer, and they said they loved the book, but they're like, no one speaks that softly.
Everybody's whispering.
It was always like, he said softly. He's like, nobody speaks that softly all the time. I was like,
Personally, in my writing, I will try to convey how they say what they said within what they said. I don't know if that was a bit convoluted, but if I'm going to say somebody is yelling, I'm going to make sure that the words that they say, that they're speaking, that you know that they're yelling by the way that they're talking, how the conversation has progressed, how their actions are changing, how their body is tensing. You already know that they're not, whispering or speaking softly into their lover's ear. They're angry, they're pissed, they're yelling and there's emotion going on there.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing of what you just said. Like putting the emotion in it allows you to show, if you have the right emotion, it shows more than like just saying she screamed angrily or she yelled, or like just telling us what they feel. If you've already put in a base of what the emotion is, then the reader, I think, is going to pick that up really easily.
I think if you develop the character well, then as long as the character stays true, it's fine. For Game of Thrones, Tyrion always speaks calmly. He always speaks as though he is correct, as though he's done research. You know, he speaks from kind of a pompous, pious point of view. And his tone doesn't modulate much. He doesn't raise his voice much. And that's true to the character. And sometimes people will read your stuff and say, no one acts like that. But in this world, this character does. So I think as long as you establish that this is the character and you remain true to the character, consistency is what makes it believable.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on another technical note, and this is kind of way out of left field. Paragraphs, formatting. There's this thing that I see all the time where people will have two people talking in the same exact paragraph, or they'll have a paragraph about a person doing something, and then the very next line is that same person talking, but it's in a different paragraph. And I think with formatting, just that it's important to remember that if a person is doing an action and that same person is talking, you can probably fit that all into one paragraph. But if a new person starts talking or a new person acts in between the first person's action and their dialogue, then you're going to have to switch paragraphs.
The rule I heard was that each person's dialogue gets its own line. I don't know if that's outdated.
It's a little bit outdated, it's a little bit old school, but it's the basic good rule. I mean, if you're really not sure, then it's really good to just use that as your basic rule. But if, like I said, it's the paragraph's about the same person who's talking, then you can put those in together. You can totally just intersperse that. You don't have to have every single line of dialogue doesn't have to start its own new paragraph, but it does if it's a different person. Sometimes I don't know how to do words unless I'm writing them.
I think that's a problem most writers have.
We don't know how to speak.
All right, so let's get into the tip from an editor. We've kind of been having a few already, but I think you have a couple special ones for us today, Victoria.
I do. My big tip today is to make it matter, make your dialogue matter. But how do you know if your dialogue matters? Well, you can ask just like a simple question. Does this dialogue change the reader's or another character's understanding of the situation? If it doesn't change their understanding or your reader's understanding, then it's probably something you can leave out. Things to leave out are small talk and pleasantries like, hello, how are you? That doesn't really help. Also avoid things like exposition. When you have two characters discuss something that they both already know, it doesn't actually move your story forward. The best way to deal with this is to find another way to get this information to your reader, or make it so that one of the characters just doesn't know it, and that way they have to be informed and your reader's being informed at the same time. This allows you to move your story forward, and it also keeps your reader engaged, and it avoids mundanities and boring dialogue.
Okay, awesome. Alexander, you have the spotlight today for your book. You want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. I'm not nervous at all. My original book is Rook. It's part one of the By the Hand of Dragon series. But in my promotional and marketing class, I learned about permafree. So I decided I would write a novella that would be a lure, a hook. And I wrote this thing, and then it kind of became a full novel. And so now I'm putting way more time and money into it than I intentionally expected. So this story takes place between books 3 and 4. So it's pretty deep into the character's evolution. And it turns out that a prison for the worst of the worst has been taken over by the convicts, and he decides he's going to go in and help clean it up. It's a lot of action, it's a lot of gore, but the conversations between him and his guide are really the meat of it, because they have very different views on how correctional facilities are supposed to function. So while one believes that the point of prison is punishment. The other believes that the point of prison is rehabilitation. Otherwise, there really is no point. So while there's lots of magic and lots of action and assassins and monsters and all of this going on, there's this very in-depth debate between two philosophies on what exactly the point of incarceration is. And that's really the heart of the story.
That's something that you guys should go check out, definitely. It sounds very intriguing.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Permafreeze a really good marketing technique, especially if you're using it to build your newsletter, because people will be more enticed to sign up if they have either a novella or a novel that they could get for free, because then they sign up for your newsletter and that's nothing to them. But they get this free book, they read it, and then they get hooked in your world.
If you're able to do free on Amazon as well, what Amazon does is once you have an author's book, they'll email you every time that author makes something else, uploads something else.
Ooh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
I get publishing.
As long as you're following an author, they'll email you every time they upload a new book or something. So people do that for their Amazon like giveaway contests. So the stipulation for the giveaway contest, like to win a Kendall White or something, would be you have to follow me. And then you'll probably get like 10 or thousands of follows. And then when your book launches, it's all these people who weren't connected to you before get an email from Amazon and it's like, oh, so-and-so published this.
I do have a quick question if we have a second.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
At the beginning of my main book, the protagonist lists his labors of Hercules, the things that he did that made him the legend that he is. And so this first book, Alengard, is one of those legends. But it's not the beginning of the story. You know, it's kind of like a Star Wars deal where you start with episode 4 and then you go back into the prequels. And I was just wondering, how do you feel, or how do you think or have heard or believe people feel about stories not being told in chronological order?
I think if you tell a good story and if the book itself is a good standalone story, they're not gonna be mad at you. They're gonna want to read more. They're gonna want to learn more about the world that you've developed and you've shown them. So as long as this is a good story on its own, then they're gonna be fine when you get ready to go back and tell them more about the backstory.
Yeah, this story is awesome.
That's right.
All right.
Pick it up.
So let's jump back into discussion. The next question I have for you guys is, how do you create a unique voice for each of your characters?
I think giving your character a very strong, clear personality. It doesn't even have to be like a strong, powerful in that idea, but just you know who this character is, and you can, or at least for me, I have to be able to see their face, know how they would respond in just any random situation, and then I can hear their voice. And like hearing their voice allows me to write it out. It's like I feel like I'm just channeling these spirits of characters, and knowing their personality helps knowing what they're gonna say.
There's a lot of newbie writers out there that don't know exactly how to develop their characters. And I just wanted to say there's a bunch of resources online that you can download for free or check out. Basically, just look at any character sheet and fill out the information about your MC, and it will start to develop in your mind who that person is. And then it's going to be easier to build some dialogue for them because you're going to know who they are.
Yeah, that's a really great tool.
I typically write one page, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 words, and I just give a general backstory. This person's from a middle-class family. They grew up, they had a pleasant childhood. Grandma and grandpa were in the home. A war came, they were you know what I mean? And I developed the character to the point where some part of my brain says, this person wouldn't say that, or this person wouldn't do that. And it becomes, the rest of the story is easier for me writing the character once I have a baseline of who they are as a person.
Yeah. I think I do something similar to that too, where I just kind of draft out who they are and their backstory before I get into all the nitty-gritty of their preferences and stuff.
I do a lot of pairing, and I kind of just do the opposite. So like in Planet Dead 1, we have Catherine and we have Sue, and Catherine was an older military person who was very jaded from life, and Sue was this sorority college girl. So Catherine dropped F bombs, Sue would be disgusted and afraid of things, and through that, I knew what their personalities were, and then I would be like, just like you guys said, when she say something here, would she run here, things like that.
Do any of you do pictures, like look up, like cast?
Oh yes, that's my Pinterest. It's full of what my characters look like.
I put way too much time in casting my books than I should.
I was just saying how much I love pictures. Like I cast every character. That's one of the first things I have to do is see their face and know what they wear and just how their smile looks.
Like the first thing I do is when I think of a story, I make the cover. That's the first thing I do, and it just feels like a finish line for me. I'll put it on my phone screen or my computer screen, so I see it all the time, and I'm just like, well, I gotta write this, or this will be a waste of time. So I do that, and then I'll make like little pictures with maybe like info and yeah. So yeah, I love the whole casting process. Feels good thinking of it like a movie.
It's really good, and I want to ask you more about that later. I'm not going to keep us here, but I do want to ask you more.
Okay. So I had something that I see a lot with writers, that if they're writing a period piece, they tend to not understand the period that they're writing for, and the dialogue does not match it. So what tips and tricks do you guys have for writers to make sure that they're writing for the time?
Research. All the research. I like to either find movies that are set in that time that I'm looking for, listen to old radio shows. I love reading old letters. Like there are so many websites where you can just look up letters like World War letters, Civil War letters, like letters from different parts of the world, letters from people who were in psychiatric hospitals and had to deal with different mental illnesses. Hearing people's personal accounts, and it allows you to hear their voice from their time, and it's really beautiful and sometimes makes you cry, but it's fun research, like listening to letters and transcripts and movies and radio, all of anything you can to just kind of immerse yourself in that time.
I hate research, so I don't do period pieces, but that's exactly what you need to do. Well, one NaNoWriMo or what Rimo, yeah, one of those I was doing. I was trying to do like a period piece romance. So I ended up watching, this is terrible. I ended up watching Rain, so maybe that wasn't the best thing to watch because I feel that fit with my period piece. But yeah, watch movies.
When doing a period piece, getting the crux of what they do or how they speak is one thing. Try not to stand on ceremony so much. So, for example, while the slang was different, slang was as prevalent as it is now. So in a formal letter, they might speak extremely properly, and they wouldn't speak that way to their friends. Retaining the human element, even through the time displacement, is a big thing for me.
Yeah, that's really important. Keep them human. I'm writing a book right now that is half in the 1800s and half in modern times. So like I had to write a lot of the older parts at the same time, even though they're dispersed throughout the book, because it's really, really hard to go from 1800s London language to present day Illinois language. And like the teenagers talking, both of them, teenagers. So there's still like that kind of young energy that they have, but the way they express themselves is pretty different.
So that would like segue me into our next point. I don't know if most of our audience would know what code switching is. It's a pretty new term, but it's meant the same thing over maybe about 100 years now. Being able to change the way you speak depending on the situation or the people you're in front of.
Well, yeah. I mean, you do that in life, right? You don't talk like how you do with your friends and family when you go to work.
Exactly. So
time.
I worked in the hospitality industry, so I was around guests all the time.
I was in the military, and you can't bring that talk home.
Oh yeah, you leave that on the block. You're not on the block anymore. That's what they told us.
Yeah.
I was with kids, so like there are some things that like I get this kindergarten teacher voice with the kids that I don't necessarily have when I'm like at home with my partner and we're like cussing and watching all kinds of crap.
Yeah. I never realized that I address kids differently than I do adults until like a week ago. I went to my cousin's place and his wife's brother was there. And I was like, hey, and I shook his hand and everything. And then they're like, and this is Lily. And I was just like, hi. Because I thought she was a child, but she wasn't. She's a grown woman. Lily is a grown woman. And I just looked weird. So when I realized, I was like, oh, I talk to kids differently.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a very important element to bring into your writing, that your characters are going to change how they talk depending on who they're talking to or where they are or if they feel safe or if they're frightened. It's going to change depending on what's happening with your character.
I just wrote a scene 2 days ago where the king and his vizier are getting a report from one of their men about something that happened, and they are very ceremonial. They address each other by titles and so on and so forth. And the second the messenger leaves and they close the door, they're like two old drunks, like just instantly with the name calling and the profanity. And when you spend every day of your life with someone for 20 years, you have to, you know what I mean? You have to get past all of the ceremony to get to the truth of it all, or they're not really of any use to you as an advisor.
You just reminded me of a scene in Lullaby where Rio meets they're worshippers of her kind. And the way she speaks to them, as she doesn't talk to like random humans that she'd meet at a club, the same way she speaks to these basically nuns as their kind of servants, and she doesn't really see them even as she would see interesting humans who have their own will and can do whatever they want. She sees them as people who are just meant to serve her. And so she does speak to her servants differently than she speaks to her family and differently than she speaks to like stranger humans that she just meet anywhere. So I didn't really intend that. I didn't really pick that up until just now, that she does speak differently depending on where she is and what station she thinks they have in her life.
And the fact that you didn't realize that's what she was doing is kind of amazing, because you just so intuitively knew that she needed to speak differently regarding whoever it was that she was in front of. So that's really good that you know that. And I'm hoping that from today's podcast, a lot of our audience will know that as well.
So it just helps to know your characters, like really just get to know them so well that you know what they'll say in just about any situation. Yeah,
that's true. You're going to be spending all this time trying to put out a story for them, build their world. You might as well just take some time to really flesh out the character and know what they're going to do, what their past might be. Even if it doesn't make it into the book, you should know what their past or key pillars are, so you know how they're going to react to certain situations.
Absolutely. I have like thousands and thousands of like words that are not in the book at all, that are just about the characters and about their life. And I don't know if it'll ever make it into the series. It's just there.
But those things are the type of stuff you send to your newsletter people.
Exactly. I put those on my Patreon a lot too.
Yeah.
Alexander, you have a bad writing tip for us. Is that right?
I do. And if anyone disagrees, feel free to challenge me. So the two worst pieces of writing advice I ever received were kind of sandwiched into the same sentence. I was told to read everything you possibly can and to write every day. I think this is horrible advice.
I hate that advice too.
Which one?
I hate it all. Like, I don't want to things that I know are bad. I don't want to waste my time. Life is short. Sometimes I'll do it just for fun if like it's so bad that it's interesting, like those dinosaur erotica books. a love of
Oh no,
so
that's
like
a
I'm not
thing.
gonna. Yes,
But yeah, that's
it's
the thing.
a big
Is it
thing.
like shifter dinosaurs? I need answers.
No,
Like, are they
There's
shifting into humans
there's
or?
shifter
No,
dinosaurs. Like what
this is
kind of
all
animal
correct.
stuff is going on?
no, look it up. It's amazing.
Yeah, Alexander, I need you to break it down for the audience. Why is this terrible for you?
Okay, read everything you can and write every day. We'll break that in half. So, reading everything you can, it was very good advice when there was no TV or radio or internet, where people would spend all day, every day for a week reading a book, and it was a very full day. And that's just not the case anymore. If you have a 5 hour block where you can do whatever you want, you are luckier than I've been in 20 years. The concept of just trying to read everything just because somebody printed it is terrible advice. And you read bad stuff, you pick up bad habits. It's just, I don't recommend that at all. And then as far as writing every day, the brain is a machine and it needs a break and it needs rest. And sometimes when you're working on the story, you can't figure out what comes next. You can't find the right word. You can't get the sentence to work. Taking a break and stepping away from it gives you the clarity that you need to move forward. So by never taking a break, never taking a day off, you're more likely to run yourself into the ground than have any explosive developmental gains. So like everything, do it in moderation, go hard when you can, take a break when you need to. But reading everything that you can get your hands on and writing every day are more likely to damage you in the long term.
Do we get to challenge this, or do we just wait
Yes, we
for?
do. You can.
Oh,
Yes, this is
okay.
a fair forum.
All
So
right.
go for it.
All right. I believe those two statements are just fully taken out of context, or you gotta at least add something to it. You ain't gotta read everything. You gotta read what's in your genre, just like you gotta watch what's in your genre, because anything else is just noise. It's not gonna help you. You're reading for entertainment at that point. And reading, if you're strictly publishing on Amazon and you're publishing in like urban fantasy, then you should know who's the top 10 people in urban fantasy, and you should have at least read their books to make sure that you hit the tropes, to make sure you know what readers are looking for. Read their reviews too, because then you figure out what readers feel like those books were missing, and then that'll help you build your book. But as far as when you come across bad books, that is helpful too. You have to make sure that you don't adapt their bad qualities. Like you sit down and you read this book and you're just like, well, that was crap. And mine's not going to be like this at all. Like I sat through a whole book that I wish I didn't, but I got it for free. So I was like, okay, he gave it to me. It's fine. I'll read this. I don't do it, but when I was first working, I did it because I set it more as like scheduled writing. So I would be up at 5 and I would write from 5 a.m. to 6:30. And that was my scheduled period for writing. And I did that every day until my wife was just like, no, you don't need this. Anyway, I did that every day. Then sometimes you take the weekends off. Like you shouldn't go at it every day hard because yeah, you're gonna burn yourself out. You're After a while you're just gonna be seeing words, and it's just not gonna give you the product that you want. And then if you're writing every day, you're not reading, so you're kind of feeding the first part. But yeah.
Okay, if I can briefly respond to that, I challenged this advice. It's like read everything. It's like yeah, don't just read your genre. Read stuff you're not interested in. Read romance. Read fiction. No. That's what I'm telling you. This is the advice. This is the advice by a published author, a professional, gave to me as concrete advice. Like read everything. You'll read poetry and you'll find a word you never would have otherwise come across. But this is also a man with no wife, no children. He doesn't have a TV in the home. But he is telling people.
I don't trust those type of writers.
You know what I'm
All those
saying?
writers that's like, I don't even know TV. I don't know what's on Netflix. There's something wrong with you. Something wrong.
And the same thing with write every day. I was like, well, you don't literally mean every day. No, I mean every day, right? Whether you feel like it or not. No, it's like that. It's awful. That is absolutely awful advice, especially to give, like some impressionable 16-year-old who really wants to do this. And, they just take your advice as concrete biblical scripture. And it's destructive.
Yeah, advice like this. I'm glad that we are doing these bad writing tips, because a lot of the times they think that they're being helpful by giving this advice, but you're really just building an unhealthy expectation or community around this writing that's supposed to be something that people love and enjoy. So yes, writing every day and pushing yourself when you don't feel like it is unhealthy. You need to do things in your own time and do them when you feel like you're in the right headspace.
The same person also told me that when you reread your first draft, if you don't feel physically ill, you haven't tried hard enough. So, what kind of sick are you?
So if you reread your first draft and you don't feel physically ill, you didn't work hard enough? Is that what he said?
What even supposed to mean?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to decipher
In fact, Martin Scorsese said the same thing.
Well, we're not going to challenge Martin Scorsese. Scorsese's totally different. I'm not going up against him. But this dude, no.
All right, guys, we can probably go on about this for a while. But let's just wrap up this episode. Do you guys have any closing comments or concerns or anything you just wanted to add about dialogue?
What do you think about acting it out? My wife is my alpha reader, and typically I'll write something, I'll print out 2 copies, she'll read one part, I'll read the other part, and that gives me the best sense of if it works.
Oh, that's so sweet.
I know, that would be amazing to do if, everybody had that kind of support system. But sadly, a lot of writers, their partners would never read anything that they've ever written, and that's the sad truth. So you're lucky to have that kind of rapport with your wife, that kind of connection, because a lot of us writers are just kind of in the dark by ourselves. We just have to try to figure these things out alone.
I'm about like 5 books in, and my wife is not done with book 1, so.
I forced my partner to read my short stories, but not my novels. That's a lot.
Acting them out with your wife, that's awesome. I'm about to
That's pretty sweet.
drop that bomb on my wife.
Yeah, that's actually really beautiful.
In exchange, I go apple picking, so.
I think it's fair.
Okay.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say, which is to reiterate something that Victoria said, is make your characters human. Remember that they're human and that they are going to react to different things differently. If you can wrap your mind around that, you have a good basis of creating some pretty solid dialogue.
Okay.
So, I have some homework for you guys in the audience. I want you to take a section of your dialogue and make it as wooden as possible. Destroy it, rip it apart, make it terrible, and then read it and understand why it's terrible. And then you might start to glean what makes dialogue good, what makes something enjoyable for your reader. If you want to post what you've done on our Facebook page or on our website, feel free. You can find us at thevoicesofcolor.com. Thank you for listening. This has been The Voices of Color.